The lights in the studio were bright and hot. Jake Miller sat in the guest chair, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He had been in many interviews before, but this one felt different. The host across from him, Amanda Cross, had a look in. Her eyes that Jake recognized. She was hunting for something. She wanted to make him say something wrong. Jake was not like other celebrities. He was quiet and thoughtful. He chose his words carefully. People loved him for his honest nature and kind heart. But Amanda Cross worked for a news network that loved drama. They wanted conflict. They wanted people to fight on camera. "So Jake," Amanda said with a fake smile, "let's talk about your new movie. Some people are saying it doesn't represent modern values. What do you think about that?" Jake looked at her for a moment. He knew what she was trying to do. His new movie was about a group of astronauts who saved Earth from alien invaders. It was a simple story about brave people doing the right thing. But some critics were angry because the main character was a white male. They said the movie was old-fashioned and wrong. "I think the movie is about courage," Jake said slowly. "It's about people working together to save their home. The main character could have been anyone, but the story is what matters." Amanda leaned forward. Her eyes got brighter. "But don't you think movies should do more? Shouldn't they teach people about social justice? Shouldn't they show diverse characters in every role?" Jake was quiet for a few seconds. He thought about his answer. In the control room, the director was excited. This was exactly what they wanted: conflict, drama, something that would go viral on social media. "I think movies should tell good stories," Jake said finally. "When I watch a movie, I want to feel something. I want to care about the characters. I don't care what color they are or where they come from. I care if they're brave. I care if they're kind. I care if they're trying to do the right thing." Amanda's smile got wider, but it wasn't a nice smile. "That sounds pretty privileged, Jake. Easy to say when you look like you do. But what about people who don't see themselves represented in movies? Don't they matter?" The audience was quiet. This was live television. Millions of people were watching. Jake could feel the trap closing around him. Amanda wanted him to get angry. She wanted him to say something she could use against him. But Jake had been through worse than this. Much worse. When Jake was 25, he had been in a terrible car accident. His best friend died. Jake spent months in the hospital. He had to learn to walk again. During those dark days, he had learned something important. Getting angry at the world didn't help anyone. Being kind was harder, but it was better. "Everyone matters," Jake said quietly. "Every person is important. But I don't think making people feel guilty helps anyone. I don't think dividing people into groups helps anyone. I think we should focus on what brings us together." Amanda wasn't giving up. "But Jake, you're part of the problem. You're a wealthy white man in Hollywood. You have all the power. Don't you think you should step aside and let other people have a chance?" Jake looked directly at her. His voice was still calm, but something had changed. There was strength in his eyes now. "I've worked hard for everything I have," he said. "I started with nothing. I slept in my car. I worked 3 jobs while trying to get acting work. I failed more times than I can count, but I never gave up. And I never asked anyone to step aside for me. I earned my place." The studio was completely silent now. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. "I don't think success is something you take from other people," Jake continued. "I think it's something you create. When I succeed, it doesn't mean someone else fails. It means there's more success in the world. More opportunities, more chances for everyone." Amanda was starting to look uncomfortable. This wasn't going the way she planned. "But surely you can admit that the system is unfair, that some people have advantages others don't have." Jake nodded. "Of course life isn't fair. Bad things happen to good people every day. I know that better than most. But I also know that complaining about unfairness doesn't change anything. Working hard does. Being kind does. Helping other people does. He paused and looked directly into the camera. He was talking to the millions of people watching at home now, not just to Amanda. I've been lucky in my career, he said. I've made money. I've become famous. But the most important things in my life aren't things you can buy or win. They're things you choose: kindness, courage, love, respect for other people. These things don't cost anything, but they're worth everything. Amanda tried to interrupt, but Jake kept talking. I don't care what color you are. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care who you love or what you believe. If you're trying to be a good person, if you're trying to help others, if you're trying to make the world a little better than you found it, then you're my friend. The audience started to clap. It started slowly, but it got louder. Amanda looked around nervously. This wasn't supposed to happen. The audience was supposed to be on her side. I think, Jake said, his voice getting stronger, that we spend too much time looking for things that divide us. We look for reasons to be angry at each other. We look for reasons to feel like victims. But what if we looked for reasons to work together instead? What if we looked for reasons to help each other? The applause was getting louder. People in the audience were standing up now. Jake stood up too. He looked at Amanda, then at the camera. I'm not perfect, he said. I make mistakes every day, but I try to do better. I try to be kind. I try to help when I can. And I think that's all any of us can do. Not because someone tells us we have to. Not because we feel guilty, but because it's the right thing to do. He took off his microphone and set it on the table. Thank you for having me, he said to Amanda. Then he walked off the stage. The audience was on their feet now, clapping and cheering. Amanda sat at her desk, not sure what to do. In the control room, the director was shouting at his staff. This was not what they wanted, but it was exactly what the world needed to hear. The video went everywhere. Within 1 hour, clips of Jake Miller's interview were on every social media platform. People shared it millions of times. The hashtag #JakeMillerTruth was trending worldwide. But not everyone was happy about what happened. Amanda Cross sat in her dressing room after the show. Her hands were shaking. She had been hosting television shows for 15 years. She had never had a guest walk out on her before. Her phone was ringing constantly. Her boss wanted to talk to her. The network executives were angry. How could you let him control the interview like that? Her producer, Steve Martin, said as he paced around the small room. We needed him to say something controversial. Instead, he made us look like the bad guys. Amanda stared at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was perfect, but she looked tired. I tried everything. He just wouldn't take the bait. It was like he knew exactly what I was doing. Of course he knew, Steve said. He's been doing this for 20 years. But you're supposed to be better than him. You're supposed to be the smart one here. Meanwhile, Jake was driving home in his old pickup truck. He didn't like fancy cars or big houses. He lived in a small cabin in the mountains, away from the noise of the city. His phone had been buzzing nonstop since he left the studio, but he ignored it. He needed to think. Jake had not planned to say all those things on television. He usually kept his opinions to himself. But something about Amanda's questions had bothered him. She seemed to think that success was a bad thing. She seemed to think that people should feel guilty for working hard and achieving their dreams. When Jake got home, his neighbor, Carl Johnson, was waiting on his porch. Carl was an old man who lived alone in the cabin next door. He had been a soldier in Vietnam and then worked as a carpenter for 40 years. Jake and Carl often talked about life and shared coffee in the evenings. Saw you on the TV, Carl said, with a smile. About time someone said what needed to be said. Jake sat down next to Carl on the porch steps. I didn't mean to cause a big scene. I just got tired of her trying to make me feel bad for working hard. Carl nodded. That's the problem with the world today. People think success is something you steal from others. They don't understand that success is something you build. My grandfather came to this country with nothing. He worked in a factory for 30 years. He saved every penny so his kids could go to school. Nobody gave him anything. He earned it. Exactly, Jake said. My parents worked 3 jobs each just to pay rent. They taught me that if you want something, you work for it. You don't blame other people if you don't get it. Back in the city, the reaction to Jake's interview was getting bigger. News stations were showing clips of it every hour. Political commentators were arguing about what it meant. Some people loved what Jake said. Others were angry. But everyone was talking about it. Lisa Brown was a young woman who worked at a coffee shop downtown. She had watched the interview on her phone during her break. Lisa had always struggled with money. She worked 2 jobs and went to college at night. Sometimes she felt like giving up because life was so hard. But Jake's words had touched something inside her. He talked about sleeping in his car and working 3 jobs. He talked about failing many times but never giving up. Lisa realized that she was not alone in her struggle. Other people had been through hard times too and had made it. I'm not going to quit, she said to herself as she went back to work. If Jake Miller can make it, so can I. In a small town in Ohio, a high school teacher named Bob Wilson was showing the interview to his students. Bob taught history, and he often talked to his students about what it meant to be successful in America. What do you think about what this man said? Bob asked his class. A student named Kevin raised his hand. I think he's right. My dad works at the factory, and he always tells me that nobody owes me anything. If I want a good life, I have to work for it. Another student, Maria, disagreed. But some people do have it easier than others. Some people are born rich. Some people are born poor. That's not fair. Bob nodded. You're both right. Life isn't fair. But Mr. Miller is saying that you have a choice. You can spend your time being angry about what's unfair, or you can spend your time working to make your life better. Which one do you think will help you more? The students thought about this. Many of them had never considered it that way before. Meanwhile, the television network was having an emergency meeting. The executives were trying to figure out what to do about the interview. Some of them thought they should apologize for Amanda's questions. Others thought they should attack Jake Miller and try to make him look bad. We need to control this story, said the network president, Richard Clark. If we let Jake Miller look like the hero, it makes us look like the villains. But what if he is the hero? Asked a young intern named Paul Smith. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Paul had just graduated from college, and he rarely spoke up in meetings. What did you say? Richard asked. Paul took a deep breath. I mean, what if people agree with him because he's right? What if they're tired of being told they should feel guilty for working hard? What if they want to hear someone say that it's okay to be proud of your achievements? The room was quiet. Nobody wanted to admit that Paul might be right, but across the country, millions of people were thinking the same thing. They were tired of being divided into groups. They were tired of being told that their success was someone else's failure. They were tired of being made to feel guilty for trying to build a better life. Jake Miller had said something that many people felt but were afraid to say. He had stood up to the bullies who tried to shame him. And he had done it with kindness and respect, not with anger or hatred. The interview was becoming more than just a television show. It was becoming a movement. People were starting to remember what it meant to work hard, to be kind, and to take responsibility for their own lives. And it was just the beginning. 3 days after the interview, Jake Miller's phone rang at 6 in the morning. He had been chopping wood behind his cabin, getting ready for winter. The caller was his agent, Tony Garcia. "Jake, you need to see the news," Tony said. His voice sounded worried. "They're trying to destroy you." Jake wiped the sweat from his face and walked inside. He turned on his old television and saw his face on every news channel, but the headlines were not good. Jake Miller's dangerous message. Celebrity promotes harmful ideas. The problem with Jake Miller's words. They had found people to speak against him. A college professor said Jake's ideas were outdated and harmful. A politician claimed Jake was trying to divide the country. A movie critic said Jake's films promoted dangerous thinking. But Jake also saw something else. There were crowds of people gathering in cities across America. They were holding signs that said, "Hard work matters," and "Personal responsibility." These were not professional protesters. These were ordinary people. Factory workers, teachers, shop owners, students. People who had watched the interview and felt inspired. In Chicago, a man named Danny Rodriguez was leading a group of construction workers in a peaceful march. Danny had grown up poor and worked his way up to become a foreman. He had watched Jake's interview with his crew during lunch break. "This guy gets it," Danny had told his workers. "He understands what it means to build something with your own hands." Now Danny and his crew were walking through downtown Chicago, carrying signs and talking to people about the value of honest work. They were not angry or violent. They were proud of what they did for a living. "People look down on us sometimes," Danny told a news reporter who interviewed him. "They think we're not as smart as people who went to college. But we build the buildings they work in. We fix the roads they drive on. We keep this country running." Jake Miller reminded us that there's nothing wrong with being proud of that. In Seattle, a group of small business owners had organized a meeting. They called it Entrepreneurs for Personal Responsibility. The leader was a woman named Nancy Kim who owned 3 restaurants. Nancy had started with one small food truck and built her business over 10 years. "When I started my business, people told me I would fail," Nancy said to the group. "They said the economy was bad. They said it was too hard for a woman to succeed in the restaurant business, but I didn't listen to them. I worked 18 hours a day. I saved every dollar. I treated my customers like family, and now I employ 40 people." The business owners at the meeting nodded. They all had similar stories. They had all started with nothing and built something through hard work and determination. "Jake Miller is right," said Pete Thompson, who owned a small construction company. "Success isn't something you take from other people. It's something you create. When my business does well, I hire more workers. When those workers make money, they spend it at other businesses. Everyone benefits." But not everyone was happy about these gatherings. In Washington, politicians were worried. They had built their careers on telling people that life was unfair and that the government needed to fix everything. Jake Miller's message was different. He was telling people they could fix their own problems. Senator Helen Davis called a press conference. She had been in politics for 20 years and was known for her angry speeches about inequality. "Jake Miller's message is dangerous," she told the reporters. "He's telling people that if they're poor, it's their own fault. He's ignoring the real problems in our society: racism, sexism, economic inequality. These are real issues that require government solutions." But when the reporters asked people on the street what they thought, the answers surprised everyone. "I don't think Jake was saying poor people are bad," said Mary Johnson, a nurse from Detroit. "I think he was saying that we all have the power to improve our lives. That's not a bad message." "My grandmother used to tell me the same thing," said Robert Lee, a mechanic from Texas. "She said nobody was going to save me except me. I had to work hard and make smart choices." Jake Miller just reminded me of that. Meanwhile, Jake was dealing with the pressure in his own way. He had received thousands of messages. Some were supportive, but others were threatening. His publicist wanted him to apologize and take back what he said. His lawyer warned him that some people might try to sue him, but Jake's old friend Carl Johnson had different advice. "You said what you believed," Carl told Jake as they sat on the porch. "You said it with respect and kindness. You didn't attack anyone or call anyone names. If people are upset by that, it says more about them than it does about you." Jake nodded. "I keep thinking about my parents. They never complained about how hard life was. They just worked and did their best. They taught me to be grateful for what I had and to work for what I wanted. That's what this country was built on," Carl said. "People who came here with nothing and built something better for their kids. Not by taking from others, but by creating something new." In Los Angeles, Jake's movie studio was nervous. They had invested millions of dollars in his next film. Some executives wanted to cancel the project. Others wanted to change the story to make it more politically correct, but the director, Frank Miller, had a different idea. Frank had been making movies for 30 years. He had seen trends come and go. He knew that audiences were hungry for stories about real heroes. Jake's interview reminded people what heroism looks like, Frank told the studio executives. Not someone who complains about how unfair life is. Not someone who blames others for their problems. But someone who faces challenges with courage and dignity. Someone who helps others without expecting anything in return. That's what audiences want to see. The studio executives looked at the numbers. Despite all the negative news coverage, Jake's popularity was actually growing. His old movies were selling more copies. People were buying tickets to see his films in theaters again. "Maybe Frank is right," said the studio president. "Maybe people are tired of movies that make them feel guilty. Maybe they want movies that make them feel inspired." That evening, Jake made a decision. He would not apologize for what he said. He would not take back his words. Instead, he would continue to live by the principles he had talked about. He would work hard, be kind to others, and try to make the world a little better than he found it. He didn't know it yet, but his decision would change everything. The movement that had started with his interview was about to become something much bigger. Something that would remind America of the values that had made it great. 2 weeks after the interview, something unexpected happened. Jake Miller received a phone call from the White House. The President of the United States wanted to meet with him. Jake was surprised. He had never been involved in politics. He just acted in movies and tried to live a quiet life. But his agent, Tony Garcia, explained that the president was facing pressure from both sides. Some people wanted the president to condemn Jake's words. Others wanted the president to support him. "This is bigger than you think, Jake," Tony said over the phone. "Your interview has started a national conversation. People are choosing sides. The president needs to decide where he stands." Jake drove to Washington in his pickup truck. He could have flown in a private jet, but he preferred to drive. It gave him time to think. Along the way, he saw more signs of the movement his words had started. People had put up homemade signs in their yards. "Work hard, be kind" was becoming a common message. In a small town in Virginia, Jake stopped for gas and coffee. The gas station owner, an elderly man named Walter Green, recognized him immediately. "You're that actor fellow who told off that TV lady," Walter said with a smile. "Good for you. Someone needed to say what you said." "I just spoke from my heart," Jake replied. "That's exactly what this country needs," Walter said. "People speaking from their hearts instead of reading scripts written by politicians and lawyers." When Jake arrived in Washington, he was shocked by what he saw. There were 2 groups of protesters outside the White House. One group was holding signs that said, "Jake Miller spreads hate, and check your privilege." The other group had signs that said, "Hard work builds America, and personal responsibility matters." The protesters were not fighting, but they were clearly on opposite sides. Police officers stood between them to keep the peace. Inside the White House, Jake met with President William Adams. The president was a practical man who had worked as a governor before becoming president. He was known for trying to find solutions that brought people together instead of dividing them. "Jake, I'll be honest with you," the president said as they sat in the Oval Office. "Your interview has created a situation I've never seen before. Half the country thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're a villain. But here's what interests me. The people who support you aren't the usual political activists. They're ordinary working people." Jake nodded. "I never meant to start any kind of political movement, Mr. President. I just got tired of being told I should feel guilty for working hard and being successful." "I understand that," the president said. "And between you and me, I agree with a lot of what you said. But some of my advisors think your message could be harmful. They worry that it ignores real problems like poverty and discrimination." "I'm not ignoring those problems," Jake said. "I know they exist. I grew up poor. I've seen discrimination. But I also know that feeling sorry for yourself doesn't solve anything. Working hard does. Being kind to others does. Taking responsibility for your own life does." The president leaned back in his chair. "You know, my grandfather used to say something similar. He grew up during the Great Depression. He always told me that complaining about your problems was like rocking in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere." "Exactly," Jake said. "Look, I'm not saying life is fair. It's not. Bad things happen to good people every day. But when bad things happen, you have a choice. You can spend your energy being angry about it, or you can spend your energy trying to make things better." That evening, the president appeared on television to address the nation. He didn't take sides exactly, but he did say something important. "I've been watching the conversations happening across our country," the president said. "I see people arguing about what success means and how we should treat each other. These are good conversations to have. But let me remind everyone of something. America was built by people who believed in hard work, personal responsibility, and helping their neighbors. These aren't political ideas, they're human ideas." Meanwhile, the movement inspired by Jake's words was growing in unexpected ways. In Detroit, a group of young people had started a program called Mentors for Success. They paired successful adults with teenagers from poor neighborhoods. The adults taught the teenagers practical skills like how to write a resume, how to interview for a job, and how to save money. The program was started by Marcus Williams, a young man who had grown up in poverty but had worked his way through college and become an engineer. Marcus had watched Jake's interview and decided to do something positive with his energy instead of complaining about problems. "Jake Miller showed me that success isn't something you wait for someone to give you," Marcus told a local news reporter. "It's something you go out and earn. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. We all need help sometimes. The key is to help each other succeed, not tear each other down." In Phoenix, a woman named Sandra Bell had started a different kind of program. Sandra owned a small restaurant, and she had begun hiring people who had been unemployed for a long time. She gave them job training and helped them build confidence. "Everyone deserves a chance," Sandra said. "But they also need to be willing to work for it." Jake Miller reminded me that the best way to help people is to give them opportunities to help themselves. But not everyone was happy about these programs. Some activists claimed that they were not addressing the real causes of poverty and inequality. They organized protests outside Sandra's restaurant and Marcus's community center. "These programs are just Band-Aids," said activist leader Patricia Moore. "They don't change the system. They just make people feel better about an unfair system." But the people who were helped by the programs disagreed. Tommy Jackson was a young man who had been unemployed for 2 years before Sandra gave him a job in her restaurant. "I don't care about changing the system," Tommy said. "I care about feeding my family. Sandra gave me a chance when nobody else would." Now I'm working, I'm learning new skills, and I'm proud of what I do. That's not a band-aid. That's a new life. Jake watched all of this from his cabin in the mountains. He was amazed by what was happening. His simple words on a television show had inspired thousands of people to take action. They weren't waiting for politicians to solve their problems. They were solving them themselves. Carl Johnson sat with Jake on the porch, reading news stories on an old tablet computer. "Look at this," Carl said, showing Jake an article. A group of farmers in Iowa started a program to teach city kids about agriculture. A retired teacher in Maine is giving free math lessons to adults who want to go back to school. A mechanic in Nevada is teaching car repair skills to single mothers so they can fix their own cars. Jake smiled. These people didn't need me to tell them what to do. They already knew. They just needed someone to remind them that it was okay to believe in hard work and helping others. That's the thing about truth, Carl said. When someone finally says it out loud, it wakes up something in people. It reminds them of what they already knew but were afraid to say. Jake realized that his interview had done more than start a conversation. It had reminded America of something it had almost forgotten: the power of individuals to change their own lives and help others do the same. 6 months after the interview, Jake Miller's life had changed completely. He could not go anywhere without being recognized. Some people wanted to shake his hand and thank him. Others wanted to argue with him. A few even threatened him. But Jake continued to live his simple life in the mountains, chopping wood and helping his neighbors. The movement that started with his words had grown beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Millions of people across America had joined local groups focused on hard work, personal responsibility, and helping others. They called themselves the Builders because they believed in building up their communities instead of tearing them down. But there was a problem. Some politicians and activists were getting worried about losing their power. They made their living by telling people that they were victims who needed to be saved by the government. Jake's message was different. He told people they could save themselves. In New York City, a group of wealthy donors met in a private room at an expensive hotel. They were led by billionaire businessman Harrison Stone, who owned several news networks and had influence over many politicians. "This Jake Miller situation has gone too far," Harrison said to the group. "People are starting to believe they don't need us anymore. They're solving their own problems. They're starting their own businesses. They're helping each other without waiting for government programs. This is bad for our interests." The other donors nodded. They had made their fortunes by controlling information and influencing elections. They needed people to feel helpless so they would depend on the politicians and programs these donors supported. "We need to discredit Jake Miller," said Senator Helen Davis, who was also at the meeting. "We need to find something in his past that makes him look bad. Everyone has secrets." Meanwhile, Jake was dealing with his own challenges. His new movie was about to be released, but several theater chains refused to show it. They claimed it promoted dangerous ideas. Some streaming services also refused to offer it. Jake's message about personal responsibility was being seen as a threat by people who profited from keeping others dependent. But Jake had an idea. He remembered what his father used to say about small businesses: "When the big companies won't help you, find the small ones who will." Jake contacted small, independent theaters across the country. These were family-owned businesses that had been struggling to compete with big chains. Jake offered to visit each theater personally for the opening of his movie. The response was amazing. Theater owners from small towns everywhere invited Jake to visit. They saw his movie as a way to attract customers and support their businesses. In Smallville, Kansas, the local theater was owned by the Peterson family. They had run it for 3 generations, but had been losing money for years. When Jake announced he would visit their theater, tickets sold out in one day. "We haven't had a sellout crowd in 5 years, said owner Bill Peterson. "Jake Miller is bringing people together in our community. That's worth more than money. Jake's visit to Smallville was special. He didn't just watch the movie with the audience. He stayed afterward to talk with people. He met local farmers, shop owners, teachers, and students. He listened to their stories and shared his own. The big cities get all the attention, Jake told the crowd. But the real America is in places like this. Small towns where people know their neighbors and help each other. Where hard work is respected and families matter. The crowd loved what he said. But more importantly, they were inspired to take action. After Jake left, the people of Smallville started their own programs. They created a job training center in an empty building. They started a farmer's market to help local growers sell their crops. They began a mentorship program for young people. Similar things were happening in small towns across America. Jake's visits were like sparks that started fires of community action. People were remembering what it meant to work together and take care of each other, but Harrison Stone and his allies were not giving up. They hired private investigators to dig into Jake's past. They looked for any mistake he had ever made, any person he had ever hurt, any reason to destroy his reputation. What they found surprised them. Jake Miller's life was exactly what it appeared to be. He had worked hard, treated people well, and lived simply. The worst thing they could find was a speeding ticket from 10 years ago. This doesn't make sense, Harrison told his investigators. Everyone has something to hide. Find something. But there was nothing to find. Jake had made mistakes in his life like everyone else, but he had always tried to make things right. He had helped friends in need, supported charities quietly, and treated everyone with respect. Frustrated, Harrison's group decided to create a scandal instead of finding one. They hired people to claim Jake had said terrible things to them years ago. They made up stories about him being mean to workers on movie sets. They tried to paint him as a hypocrite who didn't practice what he preached. The stories appeared in newspapers and on television. Jake Miller, not the man you think he is. Former co-workers revealed Jake Miller's dark side. The truth about Jake Miller's past. For a few days, it looked like the plan might work. Some people started to doubt Jake. His movie sales dropped. Some theaters canceled his visits, but then something unexpected happened. People who had actually worked with Jake started speaking up, hundreds of them. Actors, directors, camera operators, makeup artists, security guards, catering staff. They all told the same story. Jake Miller was exactly what he appeared to be. Kind, hardworking, and respectful to everyone. I worked with Jake on 3 movies, said longtime actress Betty White. He always remembered people's names. He always said please and thank you. When my mother was sick, he visited her in the hospital. That's not something you do for publicity. That's something you do because you care. A camera operator named Joe Martinez posted a video on social media. I've worked in Hollywood for 20 years, Joe said. I've seen actors treat crew members like garbage. Jake Miller is different. He brings coffee for the crew. He asks about our families. He treats everyone like they matter. The fake scandal fell apart quickly. People could see the difference between made-up stories and real experiences. Jake's support actually grew stronger because people were angry about the lies being told about him. Back in his cabin, Jake was sitting on his porch with Carl when his phone rang. It was the president again. Jake, I wanted to call and apologize. President Adams said, some people in my own party were involved in trying to destroy your reputation. That's not what America is supposed to be about. I'm not angry, Mr. President, Jake said. I understand why some people feel threatened by the idea that ordinary people can solve their own problems. But I believe in ordinary people. They're not as helpless as some politicians think they are. The president was quiet for a moment. You? No, Jake, I've been thinking about running for re-election. But watching what you've inspired across this country makes me wonder if we need fewer politicians and more people like you. "We don't need more people like me," Jake replied. "We just need people to remember who they already are." Americans have always been able to take care of themselves and help their neighbors. They just forgot for a while. As Jake hung up the phone, he looked out at the mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Jake was ready. He had learned something important. The truth was stronger than lies. Kindness was stronger than hate. And ordinary people working together were stronger than any powerful group trying to control them. 1 year after the interview that changed everything, Jake Miller stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Thousands of people had come from all across America to attend what they called the Unity Rally. But this was not a political event. There were no politicians giving speeches. No one was asking for votes or donations. It was simply a gathering of ordinary people who wanted to celebrate the values that had built America. Jake had not organized the rally. The idea had come from the local builder groups that had formed in communities everywhere. They wanted to show the world that Americans could still come together around shared values like hard work, kindness, and personal responsibility. The crowd was amazing to see. There were farmers from Iowa standing next to teachers from California. Construction workers from Texas talked with nurses from Maine. Small business owners from Florida shared stories with factory workers from Michigan. Young and old, all races and backgrounds, united by a simple belief that people could improve their lives through effort and help each other along the way. Jake walked to the microphone. He had not prepared a long speech. He never did. He preferred to speak from his heart. "A year ago, I went on a television show to talk about a movie," Jake began. "I had no idea that one conversation would change my life and touch so many others. But I've learned something important over this past year. I didn't start a movement." "You did." The crowd cheered, but Jake raised his hand for quiet. "Every person here has a story. You've faced challenges. You've made mistakes. You've worked hard for what you have. You've helped others when you could. You've taken responsibility for your own lives. That's not political. That's human." In the crowd, Danny Rodriguez, the construction foreman from Chicago, stood with his crew. They had driven all night to be here. "This man changed my life," Danny whispered to his friend. "He reminded me that honest work is something to be proud of. I see people here who started with nothing and built successful businesses," Jake continued. "I see people who went back to school at 40 years old to learn new skills. I see people who adopted children who needed homes. I see people who volunteer at food banks and help their elderly neighbors. You didn't wait for someone else to solve problems. You solved them yourselves." Near the front of the crowd, Lisa Brown, the young woman who worked at the coffee shop, was crying. She had just graduated from college while working 2 jobs. She was about to start her first job as a teacher. Jake's words had given her the strength to never give up. Some people have criticized the message that came from that interview. Jake said, "They say it's too simple. They say it ignores complex problems. But I believe the best solutions are often the simplest ones. Work hard, be kind, help others. Take responsibility for your actions. These aren't complex ideas, but they're powerful ones." In a hotel room across the city, Harrison Stone was watching the rally on television. His face was red with anger. All of his money and influence had failed to stop this movement. The more he had tried to destroy Jake Miller, the stronger Jake had become. "Turn it off," Harrison told his assistant. "I don't want to watch this anymore." But millions of other people were watching. The rally was being broadcast live on dozens of independent media outlets. Even some major networks were showing it, despite pressure from their corporate owners. "I want to tell you about some of the amazing things I've seen this year," Jake continued. In Detroit, a group of teenagers started a program to teach computer skills to senior citizens. In rural Alabama, farmers are teaching city kids how to grow their own food. In Los Angeles, former gang members are mentoring young people and helping them find jobs. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. In Phoenix, a woman named Sandra Bell has hired over 100 people who couldn't find work. Anywhere else. In Ohio, a teacher named Bob Wilson has inspired his students to start their own small businesses. In Kansas, the Peterson family saved their theater and brought their community together. These are not famous people. They're not rich or powerful. They're ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. Jake paused and looked out over the crowd. He could see hope in their faces. He could see pride. He could see determination. "I've been asked what I want my legacy to be," Jake said. "I don't want a legacy. I want something better. I want each of you to go home and continue building the communities you care about. I want you to start businesses, mentor young people, help your neighbors, and raise strong families. I want you to remember that America's strength doesn't come from Washington. It comes from you." The applause was thunderous. People were standing and cheering. Some were crying. All of them were inspired, but Jake wasn't finished. "There are people who profit from keeping us divided," he said. "They make money when we fight with each other. They gain power when we feel helpless, but we're not helpless. We're not divided. We're Americans, and Americans don't give up." The crowd erupted again. This time the cheering lasted for several minutes. After the rally, Jake didn't stay for interviews or parties. He quietly slipped away and drove back to his cabin in the mountains. Carl Johnson was waiting for him on the porch, as usual. "How did it go?" Carl asked. "Good," Jake said, sitting down next to his old friend. "Really good. Those people didn't need me to inspire them. They were already inspired. They just needed someone to remind them that it was okay to believe in themselves." "You did more than that," Carl said. "You reminded the whole country what we're capable of when we work together, instead of fighting with each other." Jake looked up at the stars. They were bright and clear in the mountain sky, far from the lights of the city. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said. "This isn't about me anymore. Those people are going to go home and do amazing things. They're going to start businesses and help their neighbors and raise their kids to be good people. The movement will continue without me." "That's how you know it was real," Carl said. "Real change doesn't depend on one person. It spreads from person to person, community to community." Over the following months, that's exactly what happened. The builder movement continued to grow, but it wasn't centered around Jake Miller anymore. It was centered around millions of ordinary Americans who had rediscovered their own power to create positive change. Small businesses thrived as people supported local entrepreneurs. Crime rates dropped as communities came together to help at-risk youth. School test scores improved as parents became more involved in their children's education. Volunteer rates increased as people looked for ways to help their neighbors. Jake Miller had started something, but the American people had finished it. They had remembered who they were and what they were capable of. They had chosen hope over fear, responsibility over blame, and unity over division. And in a small cabin in the mountains, a quiet man who had once been just an actor continued to would help his neighbors and live by the simple values that had changed a nation. The interview was over. The movement was just beginning.